In this video, I'm going to introduce you to one of the most dangerous openings in chess, one where you can potentially checkmate your opponent in just 8 moves. The fried liver attack begins with the moves pawn to a4, pawn to e5, which is already a very standard opening. Then knight to f3, knight to c6 follows. At this point, if black plays knight to f6, the fried liver attack becomes a possibility. However, if black plays something else, such as bishop to c5, the approach will need to change. Now, after bishop to c4, knight to f6, white can initiate the fried liver attack with knight to g5. This move is only effective if black has developed the knight to f6 because white's knight and bishop together create a direct threat to the f7 pawn. If black had played bishop to c5 instead, this attack wouldn't work the same way. This attack can only be blocked if black pushes the pawn to d5. If this happens, white captures the pawn with pawn takes d5. The critical mistake from black is the natural-looking recapture knight takes d5, which seems logical at first. However, this move allows white to launch a strong attack that can lead to a quick victory. But here, white detonates an explosive knight to f7. Boom! This move attacks both the queen and the rook, creating a huge problem for black. Now, black is forced to capture the knight because if they don't, white gains a massive material advantage. After black takes the knight, white immediately brings out the queen to f3 with check. This move not only attacks the king, but it also creates a double attack with the bishop targeting the knight. Now let me tell you about the very first game I ever played in a chess tournament. It went exactly like this. My opponent moved the king to g8, and then I delivered bishop takes knight on g8, which resulted in checkmate. Black has only one desperate attempt to escape, sacrificing the queen, but even then, it's a lost position. There's one last way black can try to survive, bringing out the bishop to block. Technically, checkmate happens on move 8, but if black plays the best possible defense, it can be delayed until move 10. However, if the king moves anywhere, white simply captures the knight, securing a decisive advantage. If the knight is free, white can simply capture it. If black tries to block with queen to f6, white can take it immediately, leading to a completely winning position. However, if black plays king to e6, things become more challenging. This move brings the king forward to defend the knight on d5. Instead of capturing the knight right away, since that would just result in a trade, white increases the pressure with knight to c3. Now 3 pieces are attacking the knight on d5. For example, if black plays knight to d4, attacking white's queen, white responds with bishop takes knight, delivering check. After moving the queen to safety, white can simply continue by castling. If black instead defends the knight on d5 with knight to b4, which is actually the main line in this position, white should not worry too much about defending the pawn on c2. Instead, white should simply castle, preparing to activate the rook, which will soon join the attack. In this position, black cannot capture the pawn, because the knight must continue guarding the knight on d5 from the bishop. This means black is forced to play pawn to c6. There are simply no other options. Black has to overprotect the knight on d5, or else they collapse immediately. Now, I really like the move pawn to d4, which completely shatters black's central defenses. If black captures this pawn, they immediately lose. It might look like rook to e1 is the strongest move here, but actually the best move is knight to e4. This move is incredibly powerful because it secures the g5 square for both the knight and the bishop. Additionally, it activates white's rooks, bringing them into the center. And at this point, I can confidently say that if you reach this position, you will win 90% of the time, though I'll leave 10% for unexpected surprises. That said, if black has played everything correctly so far, they have one final defensive resource, moving the knight back to e7. But this move is too passive. It blocks both of black's own pieces. Even playing pawn to d4 immediately is extremely strong. If black captures with pawn takes d4, white has knight takes d5, gaining a strong position. Now, after this, white plays queen to e4 check, and at this point, white is guaranteed to win back the knight. If black's king moves, white simply continues with bishop to g5, and that's it. Good night, au revoir, take care, white wins. The number of traps that exist after knight takes f7 and even knight takes d5 is insanely high. The main line after pawn to d5, pawn takes d5, is the move knight to a5. This move is even played at the grandmaster level, making it a serious defensive resource for black. At this point, the most common continuation for white is to give a check with the bishop on b5. However, if you don't want to study too much theory, I can also recommend the simpler move pawn to d3. While the engine doesn't consider it the absolute best move, it helps white consolidate their position. The idea here is that if white rushes to capture too quickly, black's position remains stable. However, the main idea in the best lines is to attack the knight directly, since the knight cannot move due to its own pawn and piece placement. A logical follow-up is to push the pawn to e4, gaining even more space. So if white captures here, they lose the bishop. For example, after queen to e2, white might try to pin the pawn to the king, making it unable to capture. However, this doesn't stop black from simply castling on the next move and reaching a completely fine position. The move pawn to d3 is actually a very practical weapon, especially for players rated around 1300 to 1500. Above that level, players tend to study this position deeply and follow dense theoretical lines. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll show you all of that theory and how to study it properly. The main line here is to give a check with the bishop on b5. Black typically blocks with pawn to c6, sacrificing a pawn. Now, white has several options, and I'll introduce you to them briefly. The more modern and trendy move is bishop back to d3. The classical main line, however, is to retreat the bishop to e2, which has been played at the highest levels for a long time. There's also a tricky alternative, queen to f3. The idea behind this move is that if black captures pawn takes b5, white can take the rook on a8. While this doesn't immediately win the game, it puts serious pressure on black. If, for example, black continues with bishop to b7, white can capture, exchange pieces, and eventually win another rook. So, 12 moves in, and black has no queen or rooks left. I don't know how much better I can make this. If +9 on move 12 or mate on move 8 isn't enough, I'm doing my best here. This is the main line, but even if black survives this far, they have only one move, pawn to d5, the engine-approved defense. However, a deadly counterattack exists, bishop to c5, known as the Traxler counterattack. The Traxler is one of the most dangerous weapons in chess. If white carelessly plays, knight takes f7, trying to fork the queen and rook. Black has devastating tactical resources. There's bishop takes f2, a dynamite check. If white captures, knight takes with check, and the queen is coming. To avoid all this, simply play it safe. Capture the pawn with the bishop instead. Black will move the king, and you just slide the bishop back. Now what's happened? You're a pawn up, black can't castle. And you can calmly continue. Develop, castle, and stabilize with knight to c3 and pawn to d3. If black plays into the Traxler, you can simply take on f7 and win the rook. Now we continue with d3 and knight to c3. If we can safely get the knight out, that would be great. But of course, black may play something like this. If you rush to simplify, you'll lose the knight. It's gone in many positions. But with d3 and knight to c3, you're still up a lot of material. There's one tricky line where black plays knight takes e4, trying to bait you into knight takes f7. Then black follows up with queen to h4, creating complications. In general, you'll usually play knight takes e4 as the queen can't escape. If the queen can get out and the bishop is active as well, it's better to just play check, forcing the king to move up. The winning move here is pawn to d4. The reason for this is that if black captures with knight takes d4, white can simply play bishop takes knight, creating an X-ray attack on the queen. For example, if black plays pawn takes d4, white brings the bishop back, continuing to pressure the knight, which cannot capture your knight. If black tries knight to f6, white plays queen to a 2 check, forcing the king to d6. Now white can fork the king and queen. I hope you understand all these variations.
If you think this video is helpful for you, then like and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.